There's a moment, most people know it without being able to describe it, when you look at the person sitting across from you or at the space where they used to sit, and you feel something that doesn't have a clean name, not sadness exactly, something closer to recognition. Because underneath whatever story you've been telling yourself, the one about bad timing, about people who couldn't love you right, about how you keep ending up in the same place no matter how carefully you tried to start over, there is a quieter feeling, one you push down because sitting with it gets uncomfortable. What if it isn't them? What if you're the one who keeps choosing this? Not because you're broken, not because you don't deserve better, but because something old in you, specific, stubborn, mostly invisible, has been pulling you toward the same emotional landscape for years, and you've been calling it love. Carl Jung spent decades trying to understand why we repeat what hurts us, not because people are masochists, but because, he argued, we are searchers, unconscious searchers, looking for something we lost or never had in every new face we meet. He was not particularly optimistic about how often we find it. What you're about to hear won't fix anything tonight. I want to be clear about that, but it might name what's been running underneath your choices all along. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, naming is where the work actually starts. There is a concept in depth psychology called repetition compulsion. Freud named it, Jung extended it. The core observation is this: the psyche does not naturally seek what is good for it. It seeks what is familiar, and familiarity is not the same thing as health. Familiarity is just the frequency your nervous system already recognizes, a pattern of emotional response you absorbed before you had language for it. In the years when you were learning what love looks and feels like, you didn't choose to learn that pattern. No one does. You were small, and the people around you were all you had, so you learned whatever was available. You made sense of the love you were given, even if that love arrived wrapped in inconsistency, in distance, in quiet intensity, or in the particular pain of never being quite enough. And by the time you're old enough to build your own relationships, old enough to choose, the pattern is already there, running in the background, filtering who you notice, who you feel drawn to, who feels in some wordless way like home. This is what Jung meant when he said that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. The person who felt like fate, the one who arrived at exactly the right moment with exactly the right intensity. There's a real chance that some of what you felt, not all of it, but some, was recognition, not of them, recognition of the emotional template they fit. Jung called this projection. In Modern Man in Search of a Soul, published in 1933, he wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." But here's what gets left out when people quote that line. The reaction doesn't have to be a good one. Two people can be completely transformed by each other and still be wrong for each other. The intensity of the reaction is not evidence of compatibility. It's evidence of fit, and fit isn't the same thing as health. Projection is the mechanism by which we see in another person something that belongs to our own interior. We fall in love not quite with who they are, but with what they carry for us, the part of them that mirrors our hope, our wound. Sometimes, and this is the part that's hard to sit with, both at once. It isn't dishonesty, it isn't naivety, it's just how the psyche operates when it hasn't been asked to look at itself clearly. Then there's what Jung called the shadow. The shadow is the part of you that you decided was unacceptable. Maybe you grew up somewhere anger was dangerous, so you buried yours. Maybe neediness was punished, so you became fiercely self-sufficient. Maybe grief wasn't permitted, so you learned to perform okayness so convincingly that now you can't always tell when you're performing and when you're not. The shadow doesn't disappear when you hide it. It shows up in who you're attracted to. You're drawn to people who carry what you've exiled from yourself, the emotional intensity you were taught to suppress. the vulnerability you learned to disguise as capability, the chaos you've spent years pretending isn't yours too. The most magnetic relationships are often shadow meetings, two people reflecting each other's hidden material back at each other. That's why they feel electric. That's also why they're often the hardest to leave and the most destabilizing to actually be inside. Viktor Frankl came at this from a different angle, but he was mapping the same territory. In Man's Search for Meaning, he argued that what separates human beings from every other creature is the gap between stimulus and response, and what we choose to do inside that gap. But he also noticed something less comfortable. A person who has lost connection to what genuinely matters will fill that emptiness with whatever makes it feel smaller, with comfort, with familiarity, with anything warm enough to lay over a wound they haven't looked at directly. Some relationships are exactly that. Not love, not yet, maybe never. Just something warm enough to fill the space. A presence that makes the questions quieter for a while. Both of these things can be true at the same time. You can genuinely care for someone and simultaneously be using the relationship to avoid yourself. Jung and Frankl both knew this. They just gave it different names. What the pattern feels like from the inside is chemistry. It feels like recognition. It feels, and this word is important, like home. Home is not always a safe place. For many people, home was the first place they learned to manage someone else's emotions. The first place they learned that love comes with conditions. The first place they learned to be careful. Feeling at home in a relationship, in other words, is not proof that the relationship is healthy. It's proof the relationship is familiar. Those are not the same thing, and mistaking them is one of the most common ways people stay stuck. Jung described the trajectory of this clearly enough that it borders on uncomfortable to read. He didn't frame it as a moral failing. He framed it as the natural consequence of an unexamined life, not in any judgmental sense, but in a purely mechanical one. What isn't conscious will run anyway. What you haven't looked at will drive. And so the pattern continues. Different names, different faces, same essential dynamic. The same emotional charge that felt like chemistry, the same moment, about 6 months in or 6 years in, when the familiar starts to feel more like a cage. The deeper question, and this is the one that makes people uncomfortable, isn't why you chose them. The deeper question is, what were you protecting yourself from by choosing someone who couldn't give you what you actually needed? That's not an accusation, it's a genuine question worth sitting with. Because what lies on the other side of that answer, what you'd have to face if the relationship were genuinely, peacefully mutual, is the self. The unmanaged, uncurated, unrehearsed self. The one that doesn't have a role to play. The one that would have to simply be. For a lot of people, that is the most frightening thing of all. So what does any of this look like inside an actual life? Renown it pamparimslan, amidinmingen tensam pom parentan. It looks like the slow accumulation of the same shape arriving in different faces, different names, different circumstances, the same essential dynamic underneath all of it. There are 3 patterns worth naming. Renown means the first. You keep choosing people you have to hold up. When in psychology, there's a name for the position of the person who organizes their entire relational life around managing someone else's emotional state. The partner who is always in some form of crisis, who always needs more than they give, who always requires rescue or interpretation or a particular kind of patience you run out of and then recover and then run out of again. If you're honest with yourself, there is probably something you like about that position, not because you want someone to suffer, but because when someone needs you, the role is clear. You know what you're doing. You know how to be useful. And usefulness, even at personal cost, feels more manageable than the terrifying openness of being genuinely seen. People who grew up in households where love was conditional, where affection arrived when you performed, when you helped, when you didn't make trouble, often learn to equate love with effort, not with ease. Ease is unfamiliar. Ease makes you wonder when something is about to break. So you select, without knowing you're selecting, people who require work, because the relationship that demands constant effort feels like love, and the relationship that is steady, reciprocal, and quiet feels, strangely and perversely, like nothing at all. Misand have sen pinhawan himinantitem, misam pumparimslin gold. It's a learned equation, and the first step out of it is noticing that the equation is there. Miwan weird this bin. You've known it in your body, that low-level sense that something was wrong, that you were becoming a more careful, more anxious, more diminished version of yourself. You felt it in the way certain silences had weight, in the way you rehearsed conversations before having them, in the slow, exhausting mathematics of managing someone else's reaction to your own existence. This some odd in you hemping shemenenidao, the hempten hanson denanadamal sundan, and nanadamaus or sunadam. Jung would point here to something precise. The psyche clings to the familiar not because the familiar is comfortable, but because leaving forces a confrontation with something harder, the open space where the relationship used to be. That space is where the actual work lives. The questions you've been too occupied to ask yourself, the feelings you've been managing through the noise of the relationship, the possibility, terrifying, unavoidable, that if you are genuinely alone, you will have to look at who you actually are without anything to organize yourself around. Staying in the wrong thing is, for many people, less immediately painful than sitting with that truth. The wrong relationship at least gives you a role, a problem to solve, a person to focus on who is not yourself. Jung wrote that loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you. He wrote this in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, published in 1962. Most people in the wrong relationships are deeply lonely, not because they're alone, they're not alone, but because the things that matter most to them have no real place inside the relationship. The real conversation isn't happening, the real self isn't present, just a managed, careful version of the self, keeping the peace, playing the role, waiting for something that never quite arrives. The third pattern, you confuse intensity for depth. Renown is subtle enough that it's worth slowing down for. Intensity is the feeling that this person gets you, that with them, everything matters more, that you think about them constantly, that the highs are extraordinary, that even the conflict has a kind of aliveness to it, an electricity you don't find with people who are quieter, less complicated, less consuming. Rinavam. Depth is a different thing entirely. Depth is the slow accumulation of being known, of showing up in ordinary moments that aren't charged with anything particular, of someone who has seen your worst on an unremarkable Tuesday and stayed, not because they need you or because they're drawn to your dysfunction, but because they actually know you and chose you anyway. Niabiko. Not performing, not managing, not holding yourself in a particular way so the person doesn't see the parts you haven't decided to show yet. Nyavu, mena, mondaslam pikom, begennen tasemstem, demdrdenemi naming panondanens. Du now need to sipter mahmondet humumano shramounit spigimwa nutra digom%. Nyamambaraminions anondenegenabinemi noun. Id matas iskmanum pumcricom, woman umod hum panondado wenene meantem. When things are unstable, you're alert. When things are calm, something in you gets nervous, because in your early experience, calm was often just the pause before the next disruption. Calm was not safety. Calm was a warning. And so steady love, consistent love, love that doesn't ask you to decode anything, love that simply shows up and keeps showing up, doesn't feel like much. It feels flat. It feels like settling. It isn't settling. It's unfamiliar, and from the inside, those two things look identical. There's one more thing that belongs here. In this section on patterns, something that doesn't get said enough. Winan of Geds, Ingo Duraund, and Haman Hisam Komb. They aren't evidence that you're fundamentally unlovable, or that you attract the wrong people, or that love simply doesn't work for you the way it seems to work for everyone else. Winan of Gum. The patterns are the psyche's attempt at resolution. an unconscious rehearsal of the original wound, hoping, on some level below language, to finally get it right this time. Winanu and the woman ime menyo, rispomnuham hen garst, with it in an epsitaph and dime. It's a sign that something is unfinished, and unfinished things, unlike broken things, can actually be worked on. Here's what I want you to sit with for a moment. None of this means you're broken. It means you learned something early, in a body that couldn't understand what it was absorbing. Those adaptations, those patterns of attachment, attraction, and perception, they worked. At the time they were formed, they were intelligent responses to your environment. They kept you functional. They got you through. The problem isn't that you have them. The problem is that they're running now in a present your nervous system keeps mistaking for the past. The child who needed the pattern no longer exists in the same way. The house is gone. The people are gone or changed, but the pattern is still looking for the house. Jung's concept of individuation is the name he gave to the process of unwinding this, though calling it a process makes it sound cleaner than it is. Individuation is not self-optimization. It's not becoming a better version of yourself in any motivational sense. It's the slow, lifelong work of becoming who you actually are, distinct from who you were shaped to be. It requires bringing unconscious patterns into consciousness, not to punish yourself for having them, but to see them clearly enough that you stop confusing the pattern with reality. And this is where Frankl becomes important, not as a contradiction to Jung, but as a companion to him. Frankl wrote, "Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way." He wrote that in Man's Search for Meaning, from inside a concentration camp. That context is not a metaphor, and it is not meant to minimize anything. It's the weight of evidence that makes the claim worth taking seriously. Frankl had every external reason to surrender what remained of his interiority. What he held on to was the gap between what happens to you and who you choose to be inside it. You can't choose what you learned as a child. You can't choose the emotional template that was installed before you knew you were being taught. But you can choose what you do when you see it clearly, not from willpower alone, not from determination to be different, but from the slow, patient work of looking honestly at what you actually bring to relationships, what you're genuinely seeking, what the pull is made of. The goal isn't to stop feeling. The goal isn't to become so self-aware that every relationship becomes a clinical exercise in pattern recognition. That would be its own kind of avoidance. The goal is to close the distance between who you're performing and who you actually are, so that when you meet someone, you're meeting them. Not a screen for your projections, not a vessel for your unresolved material, a person, an actual, specific, irreducible person. And this is the part Jung meant in that line about chemical substances, what happens between two people who are actually present with each other, both visible, both genuinely available, is a different kind of thing entirely from two projections orbiting each other in the dark. One is relationship. The other is managed isolation with company. Most of what gets called love is the second thing. That's not cynicism. It's just what happens when two people who haven't examined their patterns find each other. The unconscious runs the whole arrangement, and they spend years wondering why nothing quite lands the way they needed it to. The work, Jung's work, Frankl's work, any form of honest self-examination doesn't make you cold. It doesn't insulate you from feeling. If anything, people who have done some of this work report the opposite. They feel more, not less, because what they're feeling is actually happening between actual people with actual presence on both sides. What changes after doing this work, and I want to be careful to say after because it doesn't happen all at once, is not what you feel, it's what you do with what you feel. You notice the pull toward the familiar. You don't automatically follow it. You feel the chemistry. You ask what the chemistry is made of. You feel that someone needs you. You notice whether needing and loving are the same thing in this particular case. Jung wrote once, in the context of individuation, of what happens when a person begins to genuinely differentiate themselves from their history, that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, not who you were taught to be, not who you perform, not who you've been choosing relationships to confirm, who you actually are. That's a project, not a destination. It doesn't end, but it does gradually, imperfectly change the quality of the choices you make, including the ones about who you let close. I want to be careful here, at the end, not to make this sound like something you can resolve through enough understanding. You can't think your way out of a pattern that lives in the body. You can't read enough about attachment theory to stop feeling the pull of the familiar. This work is slower than that, more patient. It doesn't happen in a single realization or a single video or a single conversation. It happens in the accumulation of smaller moments, when you notice what you're doing and you choose, just barely, just enough, to do something slightly different. It also doesn't always look like dramatic change from the outside. Sometimes it looks like leaving, sometimes it looks like staying, but in a completely different way, with honesty instead of management, with presence instead of performance, with the willingness to actually be known rather than the need to be needed. Most people go into relationships asking, is this person right for me? Which is a reasonable question, but it may not be the most important one. The more important question, the one Jung would want you to sit with, is simpler and harder. Who am I when I'm in this relationship? Not who you intend to be, not who you perform. Who you actually are when the two of you are alone and unobserved and not trying to maintain anything at all. Are you more yourself in this relationship or less? Are you expanding slowly into something you recognize as genuinely yours? Or are you quietly becoming smaller, fitting into a shape that was never yours to begin with? Those aren't rhetorical questions. They're the ones worth actually answering. Frankl believed, and this is worth taking seriously given what he had witnessed, that meaning is not found in the absence of suffering. It's found in the response to it. If you're already in something difficult, if you've already been carrying this pattern for a while, the question of what you do with that still belongs to you. The pattern is not your fault, but carrying it forward, unchanged and unexamined, is eventually a choice, even when it doesn't feel like one. Jung wrote, and this is the line that keeps coming back, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. What you choose next doesn't have to be fate. It can be a choice, a hard one, probably a slow one, maybe one that requires you to be honest about something you've kept quiet for a long time, maybe one that requires a period of being genuinely alone, not lonely, but alone, with the questions you've been outrunning. The veil doesn't lift all at once. It never does. It lifts in layers, slowly, in the particular quality of light that comes from your own willingness to look. And looking is something you're already doing. You're here, which means some part of you has decided the questions are worth asking. I'll leave you with one question, not to answer right now, just to carry in the quiet that comes after. Most of us go through life asking, why do I keep meeting the wrong people? It may be more useful to ask, what in me recognizes them as right? Because the answer to that question, when you actually sit with it, when you stop deflecting it, leads somewhere real. Not to blame, not to shame, but to the specific, particular something in you that has been working very hard for a very long time to stay in the familiar. And once you can see that, once you can look at it without immediately turning away, you have something you didn't have before. A choice. If the person you keep choosing is a mirror, what are they showing you about what you haven't yet been willing to face in yourself? That question doesn't have a comfortable answer. Most of the questions worth asking don't, But something shifts when you stop asking why they were wrong and start asking what you were looking for when you chose them. The veil lifts. Not all at once, not easily, but it lifts.